First of all, I'd like to express my sincere thanks to Sean Caulfield for this invitation to speak to you. I hope that you'll find my talk of interest, and I look forward to chatting with you all later online. I want to talk to you about my role of printmaking and its relationship to my overall practice as an artist. Printmaking has been the cornerstone of my work for over 4 decades. This has included analogue and digital printmaking and combinations of both, 3D printmaking, ceramic transfers, postcards, alongside sculptures, film and installations. I also want to talk to you about the way that I've researched within collections and built up bodies of work in response to these. But before I talk about my own work, I want to mention a few key pieces by other artists that have helped me shape my thinking. I think it's very important to have artists, writers, thinkers who you feel that you share ideas with. They enable you to set benchmarks against which you can be judged and also prevent you from feeling that you're totally alone. Joseph Beuys famously said, when asked why he made so many multiples, that anyone who had a piece of his work, no matter how small, would take an interest in his ideas for the rest of their lives. Here, in this multiple, Beuys has performed an act of transformation to turn this everyday object into something charged with poetic meaning. And here, Marcel Duchamp, in La Boîte en Valise, made in the late 1930s, early 40s, has created a portable museum of his own work. Each work has been lovingly reproduced in the form of small replicas. He used a number of commercial printers and was fastidious in ensuring the quality of each piece. He smuggled the boxes across Nazi-occupied France, pretending to be a cheese salesman. Duchamp challenges Walter Benjamin's claim of the loss of aura in reproductions. Here, the idea of reproduction as the surest way of ensuring the preservation of ideas is paramount. Prints are containers for ideas and are accessible. Most of our culture is preserved through reproductions. While some may regard the multiple as an object of lesser value, for me the fact that it is a multiple can appear in a variety of situations and cannot be owned by a single collector gives it an added value. The idea of journey and portability personified by Duchamp's valise are ideas that I keep returning to in my own work. And finally, Giorgio Morandi. Morandi was a painter and etcher, regarded by many as one of the greatest etchers of all time. Using a modest language of still life and viewing the world through everyday objects, Morandi is able to invoke intense feelings about what it is to be human and our relationship to each other and to society as a whole. These still lives seem to echo family photographs, and there's a clear sense that spaces and shadows are just as important as the objects themselves. He is also concerned with the pictorial language of printmaking, using the tradition of cross-hatching as an expressive means. Many of these ideas from Beuys, Duchamp and Morandi can be seen in this series of mine, Means of Escape. These prints were extensively worked through the computer with layers before being printed 4-colour lithography and then a further line block made of the half-tone dot to stamp into the surface. I wanted to evoke a journey as a sequence. So here you have an alarm clock, you need to wake up. You need a bag for a journey. You need means of transport. You need to pack your bags and prepare yourself. And this is either that you've reached your destination or you've left something behind. Through these prints, I try to reveal a journey. I wanted them to work as individual prints and as a series. I try to create images that invite the viewer to bring their own interpretation to bear. In these two screen prints, Sites of Memory, the language of photography and drawing are further played against each other. The half-tone dot becomes a way of bringing photography into the graphic language of printmaking. These images are somewhat deadpan, hovering, I hope, between optimism and pessimism. You can see that these ideas were also taken into sculpture, as in these two small bronzes. I realised, as well as being essentially a still life artist, I'm also inclined towards the miniature. I realised I was also trying to draw or make things that could be easily read, so it was then up to the viewer to make sense of why these things had been brought together. These ideas were further explored in these three collar types and screen prints. Again, drawing is played out against the photographic, here from TV footage of the bombing of Baghdad from the Iraq War. The photographs are juxtaposed with drawn evidence of humanity. I was appalled by the way that we were being persuaded to think that bombing could be so accurate and strategic that only rightful targets were hit. While I've used the computer as an essential tool in my practice, I've often been dissatisfied with pure inkjet as the means of final production. Since layering is so important in the construction of my images, I found a certain contradiction in the flat inkjet print. Of course, the computer enables me to work fast, and there is an infinite number of possibilities at the press of command. But I need to commit to an image and give it a specific size and materiality. In this series, I've used Japanese paper, combining inkjet with elements that are relief printed from lino cuts to jar the surface and make the prints more physical. It's also a means through which I commit to an image and have to make it work on its own terms. You can see once again that these ideas get taken through into sculptures in this small piece here. I also like the idea of trying to hide things in a piece of work, so the viewer has to do some exploration. Here, in these two prints, I imagined elements scattered like clues, and the viewer taking the role of a detective. The idea of layering also gets taken through into etching, here exploring the idea of the way layering both reveals and conceals. These prints use photographs of my sculptural objects as starting points, so they become a further exploration of the subject matter. They also play with different degrees of tone and focus, of halftone and focus. I also wanted the viewer to have to focus on different parts of the print differently, so in order to read one bit, the rest has to go out of focus. Over the last few years, I've been experimenting with woodcut, developing complex layers on the computer that can be then used to make laser-cut wood blocks. These are then printed relief through an etching press to give a rich deposit of ink. These prints clearly refer back to my love of Morandi's prints, both in terms of the formal composition, but also the rich texture that results from the layering of half-tone dots. And for me, it becomes the equivalent of the way Morandi played with the possibility of cross-hatching. Of course, the additional great joy of print is that once the blocks are made, any number of variations can be made by adapting the colour and order of printing. Here are just a few variations. I want to now talk to you about some recent projects, each centred on a collection. In 2016, I worked at the Freud Museums in Vienna and London to produce a body of work to be shown in each museum. I was given a completely free hand and spent a lot of time in both collections. The themes of journey and our relationship to objects were key in shaping the project. Very briefly, the museum in Vienna is where Freud did all his work before being forced to flee to London in 1938. The museum in Vienna is relatively empty. Freud was able to get most of his possessions out of Vienna and sent to London, so while he only lived in London for a year before his death, the museum in London is full. It has his couch, his furniture, and his world-class collection of antiquities. In the hallway of the museum in London hangs the coat that Freud wore for his migration. In Vienna, there is an empty hook. This contrast and the idea of absence and presence underpinned the whole project, but it was also informed by the migrant crisis, and you might like to watch a short film, The Hope, made by Susan Steinberg, that focused on my exhibition in the context of migration, both now and in the past. I focused on this coat and managed to persuade the National Gallery in London to put aside a morning from X-raying Rembrandt's and X-raying Freud's coat for me. I had 3 reasons to want to X-ray the coat. 1, to reference Freud as a doctor and patient. 2, to reference the indexical link between the coat and its owner. And 3, to see if it might result in a metaphor for psychoanalysis, itself based as it is on revealing what lies below the surface. 2 images came to mind when I was working on this project. 1, the Turin shroud with its indexical link of the print to a body, whoever it might have been. And this photograph by Cartier-Bresson of Giacometti using his coat to protect himself against the rain. I documented the performance of taking the coat from the museum to the National Gallery and having it X-rayed, and these are some pages from the resulting bookwork. The coat became synonymous with a body, as if we were preparing it for final rites. Here are all the individual X-rays being assembled on the light box, and here is the final life-size print. The idea of the journey was reinforced by travelling cases that I made, as if the coat was to be transported like a relic, a further reference to the Turin shroud. I also had the idea to return all the objects on Freud's desk, pictured here, back to Vienna as a ghost, a sort of reverse journey, a reverse history. I had all the objects on the desk 3D scanned and then 3D printed, actual size in white nylon. Here is Holly, my assistant, scanning one of the objects, and I drew each one in turn for identification. Again, here's the finished work, and here how it was displayed in Vienna, in the place where his desk would have been. Again, these objects had a travelling case, which was exhibited as an artwork in its own right in the exhibition. The scans were also used to make this digital print, and I made some other objects to complete the exhibition, including this small sculpture alluding to the journeys of those not so lucky as Freud, and inspired by the piece of music upon hearing different trains by Steve Reich. And here an assortment of objects as if for a journey ready to be packed. And here an overnight bag. And here a woodcut of an empty suitcase. And this was an installation shot of one of the rooms in the Freud Museum in London. In 2018, I was invited to be part of a research project on reconciliation in the Balkans. I had made an artist book and this installation of bronze objects 20 years before, as a response to the news reports of the siege of Sarajevo, but it wasn't until 2018 that I had my first visit to the city of Sarajevo. And here's that installation reinstalled in the Museum of History. And out of the window you can see some of the tanks that are part of the museum's collection. I worked in the Museum of History, a building itself that carries the scars of the war, located in what was then called Sniper's Alley. In the collection, I came across this child's sweater that had belonged to Nermin Divodrovich, a little boy of 7 who had been shot in the war just 100 yards from the museum in 1994. There is a stone monument, but I felt there needed to be an alternative memorial. I remember as a child in the 50s, we had sweaters knitted by my mother. Here I am with my older brother and my aunt and uncle. It was a sign of caring, pride, nurture, and indeed love. It also was an indication of how we were growing. In those days, clothes were passed down as you grew out of them. I decided to have replica sweaters made to commemorate each of the 7 years of Nermin's life. I found a lady who would knit them for me to my specifications, from one to fit a 0 to 1 year old through to a final one to fit 6 to 7 year old. These were presented in a display case, each one representing a year of his life, and I'm delighted that this is now part of the permanent collection of the museum in Sarajevo. Finally, over the last year, I was researching in the Sir John Soane Museum in London to develop a body of work that views the museum from the perspectives of the servants and cooks and those below stairs. Briefly, the museum is where the famous 18th century architect Sir John Soane lived and worked. The house is both his masterpiece and a folly, with a world-class collection of antiquities, including architectural models and paintings and prints, including the set of paintings by Hogarth, The Rake's Progress, and prints by Piranesi. I imagine the servants being surrounded by all these extraordinary models, objects and works of art, and wanting to respond. Of course, they wouldn't have had access to traditional sculptural materials, so I imagine them playing with food as their sculptural material. Here, I've reimagined a model of a classical arch, but here made from pasta, bourbon biscuits and a scrubbing brush before being cast in bronze. And here, a column made from the cast of a leek, pasta and shortbread biscuits and sugar lumps, another reimagining. I also made a film installed in the kitchens which juxtaposed a time-lapse view of a model of a Greek temple with the collection of images of me cutting vegetables and attempting to construct architectural features. Here, printmaking was also a very strong element throughout the whole project. Here is a series of plates that I made using printed transfers, collaging photographs of my structures with a traditional decorative design. And here is another set, as if almost like souvenirs of the Grand Tour. These plates were installed in the kitchen, displayed in the original 18th century dresser. And here, a 3D printed column from a scanned original made once again from foodstuffs. I think this was pasta, again biscuits, sugar lumps and a cotton reel. Finally, a series of woodcuts, again from photographs of my constructions using sugar lumps to suggest ancient ruins. So here's a kind of pyramid, a kind of column, and a bridge and an arch. The work at the Soane Museum was part of a multidisciplinary project that came under the general title Picturing the Invisible, and we will be publishing a book of some of that research in 2021. And now, just to bring things up to date and up to the minute, a recent print made while I was on a residency in Bloomington, USA, and 2 new sculptures taking a builder's palette as a base for still lives. I'm very much looking forward to having the opportunity to talk to you about some of these ideas in this presentation when we all meet online. But until then, many thanks for watching and keep safe.